Just to make sure that all of you guys know, all of the speakers, especially the ones in track 1, 2, and 3, the heralds take the speakers directly over to the media cafe so that you can sit down, have a nice relaxing conversation with them, avoid journalists, different things like that. And speaking of journalists, how many members of the press do we have with us this evening? Members of the press. Members of the press. This is a very important announcement. Please do not photograph, do not record, do not take video, do not in any way make a record of this event through any medium whatsoever. We have people that have been hired by the organization to document the event. You will be able to get any kind of media that you need for your news organizations from those people. But I have to make this absolutely and explicitly clear. There is to be absolutely no recording of this event whatsoever. You guys got that? So, can you take pictures during this event? Okay, one more time. Can you take pictures during this event? Okay, everybody who said yes, that was really funny. But the real answer to that question is, I can't. Okay, we only have 1 minute, so let's get this done really, really quickly. Can you take pictures during this event? No. Can you take video during this event? No. Can you help the press take any kind of recordings of this event? No. Okay, have we all got that clear? Everybody's understanding the rules? Yes, yes, we understand the rules that there is no recording whatsoever. Are you guys ready? Dramatic pause. No, shh. You guys ready? Here is Julian Assange. Thank you.
Hello, Ohm, can you hear me?
Yes, they can hear you.
They can hear, but I can't hear you.
Can you hear us?
There you go.
Hello, Ohm, can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
All right. Great, thank you. It's nice to be with you this evening. Please excuse my reducing my political attack surface with this attire, but I assure you that's what it's about, unlike perhaps some future Hollywood movies to be released in October. It is quite a clear, conscious decision to reduce attack surface. Now, I heard just before I came on something about not recording video, not taking photos. I don't know why that is. Just in case someone attributes it to me, it's not attributed to me. I think having dealt with a lot of these things, I understand why you would not want people to run around videoing people or photographing them. But here we have an honour system where only the honourable are penalised and the dishonourable therefore have increased profit due to the increased scarcity of material being made available. So I would advise that the organisers try and change that, although I understand why you might want to put strictures on the big commercial media. Okay. Well, I'm going to try this evening to not speak for too long and have mostly questions. We all find people who speak at length, I think, rather boring. I've said what I've said many times, and even I start to find myself boring after a while. So I'll just elucidate some points and then hope that most of those are taken up in questions. Today, or yesterday rather, Bradley Manning was convicted of 19 offences, 5 espionage charges. He is now in his sentencing phase, which started today. He is up for 136 years. Now, I don't want to begin, if you like, with the enemy's talking points. Of course, the treatment of Bradley Manning comes about as a result of an attempt to terrorise everyone, to set a general deterrent. And to a degree that works. But you see in the case of Edward Snowden, actually there is kind of a self-delegitimisation that also occurs when a powerful organisation breaks its own stated rules and acts in an inhumane and immoral manner. Why is it so concerned about showing that it is inhumane? Well, power defines itself through its own exceptionality, its ability to not follow its own rules that it has carried out. And the desire to display power and to display exceptionality is extremely high in this case and a number of other ones. Why is that? Well, because the transnational security state, principally involving Anglo-Saxon nations, but also well worked into NATO states, feels threatened. And I think that's a very important signal that that alliance does in fact feel threatened as a result of information about its true activities emerging before the public. I think the degree of impact from the example is probably well in excess of the degree of impact from most of the material in these cases. Why, for example, has the United States gone after Cuba for so long? It's only a small country, it's really not that significant, but it is very significant as an example of successful defiance, and Wikileaks as an organization is an example of very successful defiance. Bradley Manning, according to his own statement, is a very important example of moral defiance against an immoral authority. As that case proceeds, I think we need to understand that the efforts being placed against Bradley Manning, and I suppose against WikiLeaks and even myself, while on the one hand they might give you pause because you don't want to become someone in a similar position, on the other hand, we should understand that the amount of effort being put into persecuting that young man and WikiLeaks organization really represent an economic and political signal about the degree of impact that we are having. One of the unfortunate perceptual biases that come from dealing with anonymous sources is it's only ever the ones that are no longer anonymous that are spoken about, whereas in fact the overwhelming majority, nearly all sources are successfully anonymous. They engage effectively in a inflict and endure campaign of one disclosure after another, but of course we don't perceive them. We only perceive the ones who are given elevated status by principally the national security state. And in rushing to their defense as a symbol, of course, all of us, and I am guilty of this as well, elevate them further still into the public awareness, such that the message of terror is amplified by us and by our opponents pretty much in the same direction. So I think it's quite important to work against that kind of epistemological problem when looking at sources. Now, I want to pull back for a moment and try and look down on where we're currently at. The number of things that Wikileaks has been involved in, that I have been involved in over the past, I think it's 4 years since I was in the Netherlands, is so tremendous and has so many facets that it's quite hard, I think, for most people to glimpse what is going on. But if we remove ourselves a degree, we can see that, and I hope it's increasingly apparent now after Snowden's revelations, that we are facing a new Western religion. And that new Western religion is the national security state. It's hurtling towards a dystopia. It is dragging many of us along with it, not combatants, but all of those who use the internet are sucked up into this system, and anyone who doesn't, of course, is economically, in terms of information flow, sucked into those who do. That system, that international complex of information flow and relationships in the deep state is the single largest problem that global humanity faces, other than its own ignorance. We can understand that it is becoming a new religion, it is becoming a new structure under which all the other structures are adhered to. To understand that that there exists a state within a state, a cult within the culture. Just look at the United States with now 5 million, over 5 million security clearances, over 1 million top secret security clearances, over half those 1 million top secret security clearances being in the hands of private contractors like Booz Allen Hamilton, Blackwater, SAIC, Raytheon, etc. Today it was announced that, with great fanfare, that the United States government would be declassifying one of the FISA court orders against Verizon. So the FISA court, as some of you may know, is a secret court in the United States. I should not use the word court. It is a secret administrative body which the government calls a court, before which applications for surveillance are put by the executive and ordered. It is a way of getting around the separation between powers between the executive and the judiciary. It's not a real judiciary. It has issued over 1,300 orders this year for surveillance, mass surveillance, individual surveillance, and rejected none. And the decision to publicly declassify one of those bulk surveillance orders, well, which order is it? It is, in fact, the bulk surveillance order against Verizon that was revealed by Edward Snowden. What's going on there? It's already public. Why is it at all interesting that it's been declassified? Well, we've seen this in a lot of our other publications, from Guantanamo Bay to parts of the diplomatic cables, that these documents are treated like scriptures, and that there's there's holy scriptures, and there are scriptures that are disgraced, that are desecrated. Here we have precisely the same piece of paper with precisely the same information given to the public, presented before the public, which everyone acknowledges is in fact public, which it's even been acknowledged is in fact an order that exists officially. And yet there's another version of it that is still holy, The classification program and classification czars sprinkle, in effect, holy water, 77 million vials of holy water in the United States per year to imbue text, to imbue information with some kind of property, some invisible property that isn't associated with the textual elements of the documents themselves. It is not associated with the intellectual content of these documents. And so we can have holy documents and we can have desecrated documents. And of course, Wikileaks is in the business of publishing, if you like, desecrated documents where the holiness of them has been profaned. And we can see absurd results where the United States government issues orders going back even to 2007 to its Guantanamo Bay staff. They cannot look at the Guantanamo Bay manuals published by Wikileaks, that people cannot look at the cables published by Wikileaks, that no one in the military can look at the documents related to Edward Snowden's disclosures, even though those are the very people who actually have the security clearances to look at those documents. There is a priestly class within the new national religion of the United States. And that priestly class is able to imbue one document or another document with special magical properties. And it is also able to take back those magical properties. And those adherents of the cult, they are not able to even look at this material. Even though all the public is looking at it, it's somehow defiled and profaned, and therefore toxic to what? To some spirituality, some executive power structure that is maintained by this illusion. Let's look at the publication by WikiLeaks of documents from Scientology. Scientology has been going after me and a number of, in fact, people with originators of Bits of Freedom in the Netherlands for years, in the case of the Netherlands with the Fishman affidavits. But what was going on there? Well, defectors from Scientology squirreled out secret hidden Bibles. Economic description of these secret hidden Bibles is that as you leveled up in the Scientology system, that's the information that had restricted supply, and Scientology coupled economics to that restricted supply, selling access, in effect, to these Bibles, which were meant to give you, at least the advertising is concerned, a greater and greater individual mental powers. And of course, it was an economic threat to have them be published. It was also a political threat because the material is ridiculous. You would have seen perhaps South Park, and that's and its description of OT3 with how the human race was frozen by the evil Lord Xenu, brainwashed for millions of years and stuffed into a volcano in Hawaii and blown up, etc. It's just absurd stuff, but once you're sufficiently indoctrinated into the cult, you don't see it as absurd anymore. But the coupling that Scientology placed around its own secret Bibles was that members of the cult, adherents, if they were exposed to that material before they got to their right level, to use an analogy, their right classification level, if they were exposed to that through impure channels, then it would kill them. Literally, it would fry their brains. And so you have orders by the leadership of Scientology that no one look at that material, and that if they do look at it, it will damage them. And so you have adherents of the cult refusing to look at unholy or profaned material. Similarly, we now have vast swathes of the United States security apparatus refusing to look at WikiLeaks in case they are themselves profaned, refusing to look at the Guardian orders, in fact, to modify firewall rules in the US Army to ban WikiLeaks, long done, of course, but to ban even now The Guardian as a result of its coverage of the Edward Snowden affair. And I find that such an interesting description of what is going on, that there's a religious adherence to the view of classification. And it taps into some pre-existing feeling that human beings have about the subtle, unstated effects of power and of loyalty. These are, in the end, just bits of paper. Even if we look at the law in the United States, what is the law? Well, there's the Espionage Act of 1917. It speaks about particular things. It doesn't speak about there's some bureaucrat who's put down a stamp and that means anything at all. It speaks, perhaps in some places quite correctly, about the intentional revealing of information which would cause the United States, whatever that means precisely, a serious harm. It does not speak about, has a priest in this new national security religion blessed a document by sticking a stamp on it. That's purely a bureaucratic advisory maneuver. It has no legal meaning other than perhaps you might be able to argue that having seen such a document with a classification stamp on it, one should be aware that perhaps the document might cause harm or injury to the United States, if there's some sort of advisory notice that someone in the bureaucracy believes that. But in practice, we're moving well away from that and moving into a transnational security state religion. It's not just the United States. It's something that's clearly spreading throughout the Five Eyes alliance. Okay, so let's put that aside and ask ourselves the question, are there other bodies that are starting to mesh into this global system? Well, anyone who's followed geopolitics for a long time understands that Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, SAG, Boeing have all been completely enmeshed in this, and Eisenhower in the 60s warned, maybe it was 59, warned about the military-industrial complex. There was a massive complex in the United States that built up after World War II, where industries took their part in the war effort and were extremely richly rewarded and formed a massive lobby after World War II. Prior to World War II, the United States had 50,000 federal troops. During World War II, around 8 million, and after, coming down a bit to we see between 1 and 2 million soldiers presently. So that system of integrated business and government and state power has been in existence since World War II, but we see a smoothing out now to a degree where even people at this conference are involved in the exploit market of selling weaponized intellectual products to these military contractors. Back in 2008, I wrote an article, you can search for it now, on Wikileaks, On the Take and Loving It, which was about how academics rent out their minds to the National Security Agency, whore out their minds. Highly intelligent people have many opportunities in life. Those people who rent out their minds, whore out their minds to abusive, secretive apparatuses of the national security state, they do not command our respect, either intellectually, because people who are brilliant have many opportunities in life, or morally, because people who are moral do not whore themselves out to the national security state. Those people in this audience doing that, they should stop it. They should really stop it. That's not a good thing to do. And I don't want to morally hector people too much about that, but I mean, that's a really lousy thing to do. and perhaps people don't have enough, to some degree, perspective about what is going on, but in the age of the internet, ignorance is a personal choice. It's a personal choice to not understand what is going on. Okay, let's look at the high-tech companies, Google, Microsoft, and so on, that have been sucked into this new national order. Well, were they sucked in, or did they voluntarily go? It's a quite interesting question. Some of you will have seen that I released a secret interview between me and Eric Schmidt, the CEO of Google, which took place when I was under house arrest back in 2011. What was going on there? Well, there's some information about that I put into an op-ed that very interestingly published in the New York Times. It's a disturbance in the matrix, as Glenn Greenwald put it, for the New York Times to publish that. But there's other information that wasn't revealed there. As Google became part of the international system, it went from being a culture of Californian graduate students, principally, a pretty nice open culture, into dealing with the big bad world. And as Google started dealing with the big bad world, Google itself became big and bad. In order to fight for its corner in China, in new markets, with rivalries with other companies, Google, which knew nothing about geopolitics, looked for friends. In fact, it had found new friends in the State Department. And those new friends in the State Department, well, they helped Google out. When Google was experiencing what it says problems with China, who did it lean on? Well, it lent on the National Security Agency. And the recent book by Eric Schmidt and Jared Cohen about Google, fascinating play. That book, I can't remember the title of now, is a strategic attack by Eric Schmidt and the command structure of Google on the traditional US security complex. The back cover has quotes from Kissinger, from Madeleine Albright, from Clinton, from Hayden, the former director of the National Security Agency, and the CIA, and Tony Blair. So a raft of alleged war criminals, some of the most famous in the world. On the back, inside, the first person thanked is Henry Kissinger. What's going on? Well, Google's trying to tell Washington that it is the new geopolitical visionary. It is the new Lockheed Martin of the 21st century. It can tell the American national security complex where should it go next, that it is part of family America. What is the most optimistic interpretation? The most optimistic interpretation is that Google felt that it was still necessary to do that, that it is not so completely in the tent with old power that it felt a need to undo the zipper to try and climb inside. Well, when Eric Schmidt came to visit me back in 2011, he came with 3 other people. Who were those 3 other people? They were all people associated with the State Department. Jared Cohen, who now commands Google Ideas. Effectively, he's in charge of Google's regime change department. That's come out through our cables. You can have a look at him in our cables. You can have a look at him in the Stratfor material. What was he doing? Well, he was going around into, according to the cables, into Afghanistan and doing things like having meetings with all the Afghan telcos and saying, hey, we think all the base stations in Afghanistan should be put onto US military bases in Afghanistan. The Afghan telcos, 3 of them refused to meet him. The 4th one said, well, why would you want to do that? And he said, well, increased security and convenience. the Afghan telco said, well, we don't have any problems with our base stations being blown up. Our only problems are when our maintenance guys send a van to maintain them. Occasionally the van's hijacked or they get kidnapped. But we don't think that's really going to improve if they're driving into a US Army base. What was he doing in Lebanon? Well, he was involved in setting up a covert think tank, pro-Shia, designed to rival Hezbollah. What was he doing in the United Kingdom? Well, he was in the United Kingdom meeting with executives from Bollywood, telling them about a special fund that the United States had to modify film programming content in movies to make movies less hospitable to extremism that might take place against the United States. And that they could be lined up with US movie companies that had used the same system. So that's Jared Cohen. Those of you who have read or seen The Quiet American, he is like that. He is a true believer, a personable guy, now head of Google Ideas. Who else? Lisa Shields. Who's Lisa Shields? Lisa Shields, at that time, media director for Council for Foreign Relations. Also at that time, Eric Schmidt's lover. Who else? Scott Malcolmson. Who's Scott Malcolmson? Well, Scott Malcolmson had previously been a senior advisor to the State Department, and at that time was working for Google. Now he's media director of International Crisis Group. What's going on there? All these people. Well, it's sort of an unofficial delegation from the State Department. And if we fast forward 2 months, very, very interesting and indicative event. I needed to speak to Hillary Clinton, and we needed to do this for a careful legal reason and document it. Okay, so I know how to play this game. As a journalist, you call up, you get a PA, and you say, this is a person-to-person call, and you start elevating through the hierarchy. Can Mr. Assange speak to Hillary? How are we going to line it up? What's a good time, et cetera, et cetera. And so we rose through the bureaucracy in this matter, leveling up closer and closer to Hillary. And eventually got to one of Hillary's senior legal advisors. Hillary's senior legal advisor said, we'll call you back, Hillary's in a meeting, etc. Then what happened? Lisa Shields, Eric Schmidt's lover, called one of our people and asked, did I want to speak to Hillary Clinton, confirming that the call was really from me. So Lisa Shields, Eric Schmidt's lover, was the back channel. She doesn't formally work for the State Department. Formally, she works for Council for Foreign Relations. So here we have a situation where you call Hillary, you get the chairman of Google's girlfriend as the covert back channel. That's how close Google is injecting itself into Family America. It is now spending more money in Washington lobbying than Lockheed Martin is. This structural relationship, this patronage relationship occurring at the command level of Google shows you that it has been completely sucked into the system. So it's no surprise whatsoever that in 2009 Google took part in the PRISM program. Of course, less surprise to everyone that Microsoft was there, and now that Skype is also sucked in after it was acquired from Microsoft. But we should really understand that there is the creation of a new world order that involves principally the deep state, the national security state, as a structuring force, and connected into that structuring force, many companies and organizations and individuals sucking down an economic gradient or a patronage gradient or an information flow gradient. Okay, so is there any hope, or are we all doomed? Well, it's a pretty interesting question. You know, Americans hate it when I posit this question because pessimism or cynicism is a taboo in the United States. But I think we really must ask ourselves, is it the nature of technology, the nature of the complex production of technology, that it inherently leads to centralization? Is it the nature of networking, of connecting things together, that the most powerful object, that the most powerful system of information flow and accumulation, if you start connecting it to everything else, starts to dominate? That's an extremely interesting philosophical question. Any manufacturing of technology which has associated with it volumes, efficiencies of scale, complex manufacture, specialization, well, all those things can be lent on by whoever has control of a gun. They can be lent on by whoever has coercive force, and as a result, whoever has coercive force can get more coercive force. It can leverage itself through the relationships that the highest tech companies have. And now we see that we are in, at least most of you will be familiar with the surveillance system and how everything is being connected together there across the Five Eyes alliances and all the NATO nations, etc. We may finally achieve the dream that some peace activists rather foolishly had after World War II of a one world government where everyone is connected together into the same system of asymmetric power as a result of asymmetric information and information flow and deployment of coercive force. It seems to me there is a tendency operating against it. I don't know which one will win. With the halving of bandwidth costs, the halving of storage costs every 18 months, we also see effectively the doubling of power of the National Security Agency every 18 months. On the other hand, there is a new international body politic developing. This meeting we're having right now is a reflection of that. The increased attendance here compared to 4 years ago is a reflection of this developing new international body politic and a new consensus about values and about what is important. Edward Snowden is a reflection of that new consensus about what is wrong and what is right and how to act. That new consensus, of course, needs to be transitioned and measured and demonstrated. The political will that is associated with that new international body politic needs to be made manifest through a variety of mechanisms that measure it, acts that are important, surveys that we occasionally see where whenever we have some open popularity contest, we see Bradley Manning, I imagine Snowden would now be well on the list, me, Wikileaks, Anonymous, winning these generalized surveys, not other groups. That's a fascinating thing to see. That it is who, if you make an open poll, who is it that wins the open polls? It's Western dissidents in the West who win open polls, rather unsurprisingly. But it's very rare that they're open. They're often marginalized. Bradley Manning won Guardian Person of the Year with 70% of the vote. The Guardian, of course, tried to manipulate and manufacture that poll that he didn't win. But that is a crushing victory and a crushing reflection of the true will of people to say this person represents what I believe. This person is a symbol for my hopes and dreams. And this person is a symbol also in the way that they have been persecuted for all that I despise. The increasing interaction speed that we all have is perhaps another mechanism that is going to deal with the transnational surveillance state. Yes, you might be spying on everyone. Yes, there are lots and lots of new algorithms which are developed and deployment algorithms. But we look at a horrifying statistic put out by Eric Schmidt. that there are 1 million new Android devices turned on each day for the first time. 1 million per day turned on for the first time. In a few seconds of this talk, this whole auditorium, bang, turned on for the first time. Those people doing free work for the National Security Agency are doing free work for Google. Imagine if Wikileaks expanded by 1 million people per day. That's the population, more than the population of the United States per year. On the other hand, 1 million people interacting at speed, new per day. What is the ability to comprehend and understand and manage that non-linear interaction of 1 million people at speed? That's extremely hard. I think that perhaps explains why the increasing independence of Latin America. Partly, yes, that's to do with the United States and its allies taking its eyes off Latin America and focusing them on the Middle East and China. But I think some of it is this new fast interaction speed, which even if you're spying on everything, doesn't mean you can predict everything, because the interaction is happening too fast and it's too dynamic. Okay, so I think we're, what, at 40 minutes now. Despite saying that people who sit there and talk for a long time is incredibly boring, I see that I've in fact done that. But okay, so let's cut to questions.
Just so Julian can actually see you, we're asking everybody with questions to come over here by the soundboard and line up behind me. Are we ready to go? Aryan, are you ready to ask the first question? Okay, go.
Hi, Julian. Just like some of the other great speakers we had earlier today, the only government that you really talked about was the US government, and I completely understand why. But it begs the question what the 95% of us on this planet who are not Americans and who would like to keep it that way can actually do concretely to sort of lower the impact of the US government on our lives. So any ideas you have, very welcome. Thanks.
Thank you for that. Well, you're in the Netherlands. You exist under the US government. That's the reality. The Dutch intelligence services and their relationship with the US is a subordinate relationship. The involvement in NATO is subordinate. There's a question, in fact, with what is happening now in the United States in Congress and this maneuver which just failed in terms of voting to decrease the legal ambit of the National Security Agency to conduct bulk warrantless surveillance against people in the United States. These things are completely doomed to fail. I see strategically what's going on as equivalent to the chance of voluntary reduction in nuclear weapons. Look, after the Cold War, we had a situation where it was very, very easy for the United States to voluntarily reduce its nuclear weapons complex. We had a number of countries asking for that. We had the United States as part of the NPT, the international agreement that it would reduce its nuclear weapons to zero. And all parties to the NPT are part of that. We had Hollywood movies and a pretty effective pretty strong nuclear disarmament lobby saying, look, here's a whole lot of people being blown up and killed and the radiation everywhere, etc. It's something you can imagine. What actually happened with nuclear disarmament? Well, there was about a 1/3 reduction in arms as a result of pressure even from other states. What is the chance that there will be unilateral, voluntary disarmament of the transnational surveillance complex? Well, what are the chances that if you had nuclear weapons that were not nuclear, that were invisible, that were intangible, and which didn't directly kill anyone, that there would be disarmament. Zero. There will be no disarmament. It is not going to happen. The transnational surveillance state will not disarm. It will collect more and more states into its mouth as the world becomes more connected together in information flow and political flow, etc. That's the reality. There are ways of operating against it. Cryptography, a very important way of operating against it. Politically, of course, we can't just let, you can't give free ground politically. We have to fight politically, of course. If you just walk off the field and you give free ground, the free ground will be gobbled up. So there has to be resistance. But it is a fantasy that the transnational surveillance state will ever disarm short of a mass economic collapse, which is possible because politically it's managing to gobble up all the resources. Now, in individual countries, well, of course, I think you should fight for your sovereignty of your culture. I think that the forces of resistance, if you like, which include a number of people on the left, have been paralyzed by the idiocy of transnationalism. Post-World War II, and as a result of pressures from the United States, the view that, we should all open up, that our national governments are not important, and national cultures are not important. What has that led to? It has led to individual cultures being like white rice, and they take upon whatever flavour, they take upon the majority flavour that's pushed into them. And the majority flavour, the majority power in terms of information flow and systems of organisations is the transnational system that the United States and Great Britain erected after World War II. So yeah, I think part of the answer to this question is nationalism, and it's having states recognize that their sovereignty and their power structures completely undermined. It's a difficult problem. You have co-option of all the principal players in the state. The people who have the levers of power in each state are corrupted and co-opted and bribed and blackmailed by that system. So I think actually, other than getting individual states concerned about this and forming alliances of states, as we see in Latin America, who might resist it, the only path forward is strong cryptography. It's the only hope, producing effectively a defensive weapon system, a defensive system against bulk state spying. Other states who are threatened need to engage and invest in that. As individuals, we need to do that. Corporations who are subject to it also need to do it.
So you've been there for quite a while in the embassy. What's your end game to get out of there? Do you have a plan? You can live there forever?
You know, I mean, we can ask this to everyone. What's your end game? In the end, you all die, right? So, but before that happens, you might be able to do something that is useful and satisfying, and that adheres to your principles and defends the people you care about. So I'm not trapped in this embassy. I was outside this embassy. I came into this embassy for a very specific purpose, to engage geopolitically the region of South America with this issue. That has been successful. There's $10 million admitted by the British government of surveillance per year outside this embassy. It is a difficult environment, but as we see with Edward Snowden's, how will I put it, trip out of Hong Kong, that actually there is still some room to maneuver if you're extremely careful and diligent.
Hey, Julian. I really wish you'd be around here with us because, you know, it's beautiful. And I think that if all of us work hard enough, maybe sometime soon, well, you, Edward Snowden, Bradley Manning, and all of us, you know, hang around and have fun with lots of lights. And sometimes, well, you were right. You were right. And Bradley, Edward, and you show us every day that courage is actually contagious. I have a question here. Take a random hacker with a little bit of talent and a little bit of courage. What she or he could do to help Wikileaks today, what she or he could maybe contribute to some meaningful free software project that helps the cause of freedom of speech, freedom of information, and making the world a better place.
Yeah, thank you, Jeremy. Those who don't know, Jeremy Zimmerman and La Quadrature du Net, one of the people stopped going out from the United States by a pair of FBI officers and effectively asked to become an informer against me. Jeremy, as you see, completely...
Because I'm your friend, basically. Yeah. Only because I'm your friend.
Yeah, that's right, that's right. That's true. Asked to become an informer against me. As you see, Jeremy Zimmerman, not at all cowed by that. I think that's the first thing to understand. That the transnational system, authority complexes, don't need to have real power. They don't need to have competence. All they need to do is project an image that makes people scared and that makes them comply. They do that whenever they possibly can. That is part of something which in critical theory is called securitization, which is taking any event and putting it into redefining it in terms of the security complex and what that can do. And so that's the first thing. Don't fall for all this bullshit. I mean, we have many people here who are not scared. There are people who make mistakes, who are not sufficiently cautious or extremely unlucky, who get embroiled in something. My position here, this isn't a result of me sort of making a mistake. This is a very conscious decision way back in 2010 that certain things were important to me and that I would do those. And yes, I was willing to see even Wikileaks as an organization completely destroyed rather than to not publish. It's something I thought about very, very consciously. As you see, I'm not in prison. I'm not dead. I'm continuing with our work. We're smashing banking blockades, winning lawsuits everywhere, engaging in new publications, and you know, the serious business that we're engaged in. So first of all, don't fall for the bullshit. These agencies, while vast in terms of their presence and surveillance, are deeply incompetent, ferociously incompetent. Let's look at Afghanistan, the second poorest country on the earth. Two superpowers, the United States and Europe, have been unable to subjugate the second poorest country on earth because they are so incompetent that they don't really believe in the mission and so on. Similarly, the United States has been unable to get a hold of Edward Snowden, has sprayed out extradition orders all over the world. Even Ireland has rejected those extradition requests. Small Latin American countries have rejected them. So yes, this overarching system does tend towards a dystopia, but it also tends towards incredible internal incompetence and stupidity. And that's really something you can work with. Now, as individual hackers, well, you can always give, and that's very important, you can always give WikiLeaks money, information, the people who are associated with us and defend us, money, information, talent, where you can. Work on cryptography projects, those are extremely important. I think distributed, safe chat and messaging is perhaps one of the most important things. I see that is evolving now. I've been speaking about it for a while. It is slowly but surely evolving. The Edward Snowden Defense Committee, which we've formed, well, it needs a bunch of web programmers and so on. It's a bit hard to get people in the United States to contribute to that. You can speak to Annie Mahmoud and Tom Drake if you want to volunteer some labour activity, or Jeremy perhaps as well if you want to volunteer programming time or funds.
Hi, Julian. Big thanks to you and all the people that supported you. And my question is, if you personally could change just 3 things, what would they be and why?
Well, I mean, if I was what Supreme Lord Master of the Universe, or is there some well, you know, I'd make everyone infinitely intelligent, infinitely compassionate, and live forever. There you go.
Hey, Julian. I'd just like to echo the sentiments and say thank you for your sacrifice and the sacrifice of many others who've helped you and helped bring the information to light. One of the defence mechanisms of the system seems to be to isolate people like yourself, like Bradley Manning and like Edward Snowden, so that they can then pick on those single people and bring them down. Now, how can we get back to this being about the information and not about the people? Because the information is what's important, getting the information to the masses, and then the people will become unimportant as the information gets out there.
Yeah, well, it's, you know, at the base level, if you can't argue with if you can't play if you can't play the ball, to use an Australian phrase, you play the man. You engage in ad hominem attacks to try and divert the discussion. We've seen that with me. We've seen that with Bradley Manning. We've seen that with Glenn Greenwald. We've seen that with Edward Snowden, and many other cases. We saw it. Those who've read your history books with Nelson Mandela. He was absolutely demonized as a terrorist. He couldn't even go to the United States until 1998. He was banned from travel. You know, those things tend to fall away after a while. But let's look at it in another way. The world is complex, and therefore people need symbols to stand for things. Every word that we use, in fact, is a cognitive symbol. All apples are different to each other, but we have the word apple to abstract the appleness away and provide a symbol. Similarly, me, Bradley Manning, Edward Snowden, we are symbols for something. Symbols for something that are quite important. Now, the fate of Edward Snowden, conceptually, that is a referendum on the National Security Agency. Everyone understands that. Edward Snowden and those who support him are going to win in terms of his liberty and how he is perceived, or they're going to lose. And if he wins, and that's somehow clearly related to popular support, that is a symbol, an answer to, okay, that this thing was unacceptable. If he loses, that is a symbol for, okay, perhaps the majority force is opposed to him. So it is actually quite important to defend and support symbols and symbolic organizations because the world is so complex.
Hi, Julian. What you said before about religion during your talk made me think of a story being told. So the story that's being told that mankind needs more surveillance and more security, etc., to avoid some harm. So if that's actually a harmful story, what kind of story would you propose to tell that is more beneficial? And yeah.
So what you're saying, what we need the new biblical stories of our age, the new national security religion has a whole lot of, biblical stories now that it goes around. What the NSA can walk on water, I suppose, something like that, to save everyone from the devil, which is terrorists, or Osama bin Laden, these mythical figures rising from the desert. So I agree. We need a new story to pull people together. People need to understand and have hope. I said before that there is a dystopia rushing towards us. On the other hand, there's a very interesting new dynamic of a new political estate and a new collection of values that is arising as a result of the internet, the period of unparalleled mass political education and sharing of knowledge, the likes of which the world has never seen. It has never seen something like that. And as a result, an empowerment and emancipation of a variety of different groups, of which even this conversation is a part of, the Pirate Party, the Wikileaks Party, which is now running for elections in Australia. I think ultimately the mindset that comes from that new international body politic is such that you cannot hire a technical person that has not been educated on the internet. In fact, you cannot hire an educated person now, a newly educated person that hasn't been widely exposed to the values and knowledge and political understanding that comes out of the internet. I think that is a great hope. It remains to be seen how this conflict works out. That's what makes it so fascinating and so interesting, that we have this, there's a sound that is echoing all around at the moment, and that sound is the sound of the clash of the rising power of these two forces, this new international body politic and the transnational security state. These things are clashing together, and we hear that sound.
It's my turn. Hello. I have a very simple question. I would like to know how you analyze the fact that the accusation against Bradley Manning of intelligence with the enemy was finally abandoned. Was it the step that the American administration could not take at the time?
Yeah, it's quite interesting as to what went on there. First of all, I see that charge is largely as a red herring. He started with 22 charges. He went down to 20. He's facing 136 years. The aiding the enemy charge would have given him life. He's not going to live 150 years anyway. So that's, if he was 80, he would still have, what, 70, over 70 years still left to serve, in theory. That's not going to happen. It's going to collapse down as a result of a strong campaign by us and his defenders. But I think that it was put there as a sort of amber claim, as, let's see how far we can go. We want to constantly push the envelope. Already a very, very serious 5 counts of espionage for what everyone agrees is a journalistic source. There was no evidence produced in the trial that any harm at all came to any person as a result of our publications. None at all. It was not claimed, it was not alleged, it was not proven. There's no accusation that he was involved with a foreign power. None at all. No evidence was adduced that he was. And yet we have 5 charges for espionage. That is a very serious, bold new pushing of the envelope by the security complex in the United States. It wanted to go even further with this aiding the enemy charge. It's a victory, yes, that's knocked out. It means he can't be sentenced for life. That's quite important. But I think this was always a completely, utterly absurd amber claim.
Hey. I wanted to ask your point of view on these times that we're living. As in, I think that this time is sort of a showdown where everybody is now aware of the fact that global surveillance is happening and that whistleblowers are being harassed and prosecuted. And I feel that, everybody knows what is happening. However, my greatest fear is that people know of this and they decide that it's not important and that they do not care and that it is acceptable that surveillance happens on such a global scale. And I fear that if people actually, say that and acknowledge that fact, they will, have made this choice, and this choice will be the choice that we have to stick with. So how do we make sure that people care about this and that this choice does not get made now?
Yeah, it's hard. I've often said that people are not apathetic. People are powerless because they're apathetic. They're apathetic because they're powerless. I see that most people don't perceive a way that they can meaningfully engage to resist this. They're wrong. That's a matter of education. It's also a matter of us to provide more mechanisms that people can meaningfully engage. It's also a matter of, keeping, for God's sakes, keeping things in perspective. I've seen so many attacks on me, on our organisation, on people who've helped our organisation, not from the Pentagon. We've faced those down. We've faced down every single demand that the Pentagon has made for us to destroy publications and so on. But by opportunists, local opportunists, looking for local political opportunity, by absurd competition within the activist community. We have to go, what side of the goddamn line are you on? Are you on this side of the line or on that side of the line? Make your mind up, because if you don't show clear adherence to what side of the line you're on now, what's going to happen? What's going to happen when things get even worse? Can you be trusted at all? And I think that's very important. Well, of course, we always need some form of intellectual self-criticism. It's always in conflicts. Unity is everything, and coherency is everything. And the most unified group that has the tools to unify it and the wherewithal to unify itself wins, is the National Security Agency and the mechanisms that it uses to unify itself. Coercive power and information flows. Is that a more unified group than the resistance? Well, actually, pretty clearly it is more unified. On the other hand, it's pretty incompetent. There's not much passion there. It lacks flexibility, it lacks speed. So I would say that that's something that's extremely important. Let's not be engaged in constantly kicking own goals. We can't, we just cannot go down that line and expect to succeed at all.
Dear sir, thank you for all your answers. There are many answers left, but I wish you much of speech, space and freedom in your head and physical.
Thank you. Thank you. Do we have more? I could go for more.
That was the last question.
No more questions? I could go for more. Come on. Do we have
one more question? That is, as a personal experience of mine, is that when I speak to other people about problems in this world, is that, well, a lot of them seem to have the opinion that it's worth it to sacrifice your privacy to gain extra security from crime or other kinds of wrongdoing. And, well, I don't have a clue how to convince those people who seem to make up a great part of the masses that we need to convince in order to do anything about it. So how do you suppose we convince those people?
Thank you. Well, if they're American, it's a good place to start. So you believe we should repeal the Fourth Amendment. You know, it's quite easy. We should just scrap the Fourth Amendment then, because the Fourth Amendment says that there should not be searching and seizure of people's information or assets or property without proper due process. But if we look at a less instrumentalist version, it's fine, actually. Crime is a problem. It is a problem. And yeah, sure, state surveillance structures reduce crime, anonymity increases crime. That's true. Similarly, for those nations that are threatened by invasion, like Cuba and Iran, of course, they have to defend themselves against invasion. And the result is oppressive apparatuses build up inside to defend themselves from those sorts of attacks. So I think we should start out sort of recognizing the position and then go, yeah, but the propaganda about terrorist attacks and crime is vastly disproportionate to the reality. And that it's not always a trade-off between these two things. There's many areas where there is no trade-off. And finally, but most importantly, if the state is out of control, it is an armed gang. I mean, if you want to look into the theory of how states arrive, they are mafias. They're small regional groups of bandits who start extracting concessions from the population. Groups of bandits band together and are able to defeat smaller groups of bandits, and that's what, in the end, forms a state. They are protection rackets that shake people down in what would be traditionally called tithe and what we now call tax. But when the state goes bad, the amount of crime that is inflicted on you as an individual is tremendous. And there's often nowhere for your family to hide or to deal with that. So it is the extreme potential for crime and terror and coercive force being misapplied that we need to watch out for. In the US justice system, that's already happening. I mean, the US federal justice system is one of the worst things that exist on Earth as a sort of debauchery of the way human beings should treat each other. A grand jury, if you were before a grand jury, there is a 99.97% chance that you will be indicted. 99.97. If you are indicted, there is a 99% chance you will be convicted. 99%. That is not a judicial system. That is rule by decree with those sorts of statistics. So there's something where we already see when a state has too much central power, it doesn't have to negotiate its power with its population. There is no quid pro quo with the population.
Hello, Julian. I'm glad you're in good shape. I've seen you 4 years ago, though you're somewhere else tonight. I have a question regarding your run in Australia. I heard an interview 1 week ago, I think it was, from ABC Australia. It looks as if the political system there doesn't want another party. So do you think you have chances there?
Yeah, well, what existing establishment wants encroachment on its territory? Well, none. But actually, we have amazing figures. For the past year and a half, opinion polls have been done by UMR Research. It is the government's own polling agency, and they show that I have between 25 and 28% of the vote consistently nationwide across Australia. Now, of course, at actual election time, that will reduce because people revert to their existing habits. But that is not support figures. The support figures are in 60 to 80%. That is voting intention, 25 to 28% of the population. For WikiLeaks as a party, it's 20% nationwide average. And those are repeated again and again, completely consistent, even across different polling companies. So actually, we are the leading party, other than the three existing parties, three existing big parties, the Conservatives, the Labor, and the Greens. And actually, the Greens is an interesting question, whether in some areas we might be surpassing the Greens in that polling. And importantly, if we look at voting intention of people under the age of 40, it's 40%. That's something very interesting is going on. 40% of the Australian population, their voting intention is to vote for me. Yes, they want to, in part, defend an Australian who's been badly treated by the Australian government. But to such a degree, across so many different aspects, I see that as the future international body politic. The people under the age of 30 are the most educated by the internet. They are the most educated, full stop. That's the most educated generation the world has ever seen. And as a result of its education and understanding and its ability to look through the bullshit being provided by the establishment press, we see 40% of the vote.
Hi, Julian. I wanted to ask you for clarification on something that you said, which is that nationalism would be part of our defense. And I mean, I remember having a similar thought watching Edward Snowden try to find a safe harbor, that it's good, even though the countries he considered obviously have their problems and are still to be criticized, that the whole world is not yet under US behest and orders. But I still can't square the word nationalism with, you know, our global movement of hackers meeting up here. So could you maybe clarify a little bit on the extent that you're referring to that?
Yeah, they're in conflict, aren't they? I agree that a transnational culture and national cultures are in conflict. I mean, the problem we're having with the transnational order is, as you can see, it is not an order of all of us. It is an order of essentially for the Anglo-Saxon states put together and then foisted on occupied Europe, and have now feathered out to other domains. Let's look at the G20. It's meeting in Russia in September. In fact, the pressure point for Edward Snowden and his relationship with Russia comes about as a result of the G20 and Obama meeting just a few days beforehand. Let's look at the G20. The G20 are the most economically powerful states in terms of purchasing parity and equivalence and so on. Of the G20, who are the independent states that we can reasonably say are independent? Well, there's perhaps Argentina, Russia, China, maybe a little bit, although it is pretty much all into the US system, Indonesia. And that's it, just 4 out of the G20. The G20 got all the power. That's a pretty worrying statistic. Well, I think let's push it further. And those of you who have read my introduction to cypherpunks, which is on Cryptome, you can see it, will understand what it means to push it further. Well, our new society, our new international body politic that emerges very naturally as a result of this transnational interaction that we're all having on the internet, as a result of seeing through the bullshit, as a result of sharing information with each other about what the bullshit is. Well, it's a bit like a new culture. The question is, what defends this new culture? Does it have an army to defend it? Does it have governmental structures to defend it? Can it find some other way to free itself as a result of the interference by other state structures or transnational state structures? I mean, pushing things forward the new body politic that has arisen on the internet has to declare independence. It has to get to that stage where it can declare independence in a practical sense, where its structures and its own internal history is not subject to the domination by other structures. We're getting there, bits and pieces. Other things are also being stolen away as a result of centralization. So I think that's quite an important battle. If we can build those structures and keep them there, then this new international consensus that we have about what is important and what is right, then we can hold it up, and that will provide some kind of counterweight. It remains to be seen the degree. Of course, in the cases of say, Edward Snowden and a number of other organizations, a few very committed people can actually make a big difference. Arguably, they're the only thing it ever has. Scarcity of material being made available. So I would advise that the organisers try and change that, although I understand why you might want to put strictures on the big commercial media. Okay. Well, I'm going to try this evening to not speak for too long and have mostly questions. We all find people who speak at length, I think, rather boring. I've said what I've said many times, and even I start to find myself boring after a while. So I'll just elucidate some points and then hope that most of those are taken up in questions. Today, or yesterday rather, Bradley Manning was convicted of 19 offences, 5 espionage charges. He is now in his sentencing phase, which started today. He is up for 136 years. Now, I don't want to begin, if you like, with the enemy's talking points. Of course, the treatment of Bradley Manning comes about as a result of an attempt to terrorize everyone, to set a general deterrent. And to a degree that works. But you see in the case of Edward Snowden, actually there is kind of a self-delegitimization that also occurs when a powerful organization breaks its own stated rules and acts in an inhumane and immoral manner. Why is it so concerned about showing that it is inhumane? Well, power defines itself through its own exceptionality, its ability to not follow its own rules that it has carried out. And the desire to display power and to display exceptionality is extremely high in this case and a number of other ones. Why is that? Well, because the transnational security state, principally involving the Anglo-Saxon nations, but also well worked into the NATO states, feels threatened. And I think that's a very important signal that that alliance does in fact feel threatened as a result of information about its true activities emerging before the public. I think the degree of impact from the example is probably well in excess of the degree of impact from most of the material in these cases. Why, for example, has the United States gone after Cuba for so long? It's only a small country, it's really not that significant, but it is very significant as an example of successful defiance and WikiLeaks as an organization is an example, a very successful defiance. Bradley Manning, according to his own statement, is a very important example of moral defiance against an immoral authority. As that case proceeds, I think we need to understand that the efforts being placed against Bradley Manning, and I suppose against WikiLeaks and even myself, while on the one hand they might give you pause because you don't want to become someone in a similar position. On the
rules? Yes, yes, we understand the rules that there is no recording whatsoever. Are you guys ready? Dramatic pause. No, shh. You guys ready? Here is Julian Assange. Thank you.
Hello, Ohm, can you hear me?
Yes, they can hear you.
They can hear, but I can't hear you.
Can you hear us?
There you go.
Hello, Ohm, can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
All right. Great, thank you. It's nice to be with you this evening. Please excuse my reducing my political attack surface with this attire, but I assure you that's what it's about, unlike perhaps some future Hollywood movies to be released in October. It is quite a clear, conscious decision to reduce attack surface. Now, I heard just before I came on something about not recording video, not taking photos. I don't know why that is. Just in case someone attributes it to me, it's not attributed to me. I think, having dealt with a lot of these things, I understand why you would not want people to run around videoing people or photographing them. But here we have an honour system where only the honourable are penalised and the dishonourable therefore have increased profit due to the increased
Just to make sure that all of you guys know, all of the speakers, especially the ones in track 1, 2, and 3, the heralds take the speakers directly over to the media cafe so that you can sit down, have a nice relaxing conversation with them, avoid journalists, different things like that. And speaking of journalists, how many members of the press do we have with us this evening? Members of the press. Members of the press. This is a very important announcement. Please do not photograph, do not record, do not take video, do not in any way make a record of this event through any medium whatsoever. We have people that have been hired by the organization to document the event. You will be able to get any kind of media that you need for your news organizations from those people. But I have to make this absolutely and explicitly clear. There is to be absolutely no recording of this event whatsoever. You guys got that? So, can you take pictures during this event? Okay, one more time. Can you take pictures during this event? Okay, everybody who said yes, that was really funny. But the real answer to that question is, I can't. Okay, we only have 1 minute, so let's get this done really, really quickly. Can you take pictures during this event? No. Can you take video during this event? No. Can you help the press take any kind of recordings of this event? No. Okay, have we all got that clear? Everybody's understanding the rule?
On the other hand, we should understand that the amount of effort being put into persecuting that young man and WikiLeaks, the organisation, really represent an economic and political signal about the degree of impact that we are having. One of the unfortunate perceptual biases that come from dealing with anonymous sources is it's only ever the ones that are no longer anonymous that are spoken about, whereas in fact the overwhelming majority, nearly all sources are successfully anonymous. They engage effectively in a inflict and endure campaign of one disclosure after another, but of course we don't perceive them. We only perceive the ones who are given elevated status by principally the national security state. And in rushing to their defense as a symbol, of course, all of us, and I am guilty of this as well, elevate them further still into the public awareness, such that the message of terror is amplified by us and by our opponents pretty much in the same direction. So I think it's quite important to work against that kind of epistemological problem when looking at sources. Now, I want to pull back for a moment and try and look down on where we're currently at. The number of things that WikiLeaks has been involved in, that I have been involved in over the past, I think it's